What's the best "you have no power here" moment you've ever witnessed? I got pulled into a room by a manager who had just had me assigned to her. I've been working here 10 years and know the rules. She's been there for a year. She signs my timesheets and so pulls me into a room and starts telling me she's not comfortable with me starting work at 6:30 a.m. and leaving by 2:30 p.m. to get my small child from school. She argues that it's bad optics and that yes, it's not fair for working mothers, but she prefers I work more regular hours, noting 95% of my job is writing reports and assessing planning applications, and she thinks I should get a babysitter for after-school pickups. I tell her that policy says that my work hours can be between 6 and 6, flexible workplace legislation, and that her preference for when I work doesn't overwrite company policy. I've worked this way for the last 5 years. I told her that if she wants, she can put that in writing, and I'll take her email to HR to discuss how it aligns with the policy. It was the last time she told me when I'm allowed to work. Next story. I worked 11 to 7 for years as a closer. No one else would take that shift. My manager worked 9 to 5. When I got promoted, I insisted on working the manager shift, 9 to 5. Supervisor tried extremely hard to force me to continue working 11 to 7 as a manager. I went to HR. HR was blunt that I needed to be there to open the day. He kept both my staff on at 9 to 5, so we had triple coverage to force me to work 11 to 7. Eventually, head office stepped in on his scheduling and told him to move someone to close. Someone not me. He pouted but complied, for like a week. Then he decided to restructure my team and set a team member on from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. as an opener. Then he said that, quote, "Since you're not opening, you can manage as a closer." I said, nope. My shift works well for department needs so that I can be there when the day starts at 9 a.m. This is not controversial that managers work at the start of the day. He even cut hours off my closer so that they closed from 3 to 7 and not 11 to 7. My closer was even happier with that schedule, to his frustration. Then he threatened me with termination if I didn't take the 7 a.m. shift so that he could slide my coworker into the 9 to 5 slot immediately. I said no, because I'm the manager and I get my first choice of shifts, which is 9 to 5, as it had been for the last 3 years. Eventually, I was fired, still couldn't get coverage for closing, and I think they have 5 people doing the job that 2 people used to do. Next story. My dad is a grade A a-hole. A few summers ago, my grandparents were being rude to my younger brother and sister. They wanted to go to the sandbar party on the 4th of July because they were mid-20s kids. When I reminded my grandparents they're adults who can do what they want and I would even transport them sober, my dad stepped in and said I better watch how I speak. I said, "Or what? Are you going to ground me? I'm 32 with my own money, car, and home." I'll never forget the way he just stared at me. All the things he held over my head when I was younger were gone. Yeah, that really is a liberating feeling, whether you have a good relationship with your parents or not. The moment that you can finally say like, hey, I don't need to depend on you for anything anymore. I'm completely self-sufficient. Good for you, OP. Next story. My dad found out I smoke weed when I was in my late 20s. I was temporarily living with my parents due to complicated reasons. The thing is, I didn't really need nor want to live with them. I had multiple friends tell me I could move in with them, and I could always just rent or co-house with strangers. It was my parents who insisted I moved back in with them instead of any of the other options. When he found out, he launched into a fury. He couldn't do anything to me physically because I've got like 15 to 20 kilograms of muscle on him. That ship has sailed a long time ago, so he started flailing and ranting about how he doesn't want to associate with drug addicts. No one living under his roof will ever do drugs, etc. So I just calmly told him that's fine, I'll call up a friend and I'll be moved out before the end of the day. He doesn't have to hear from or see me again either if it bothers him so much. The thing is, he's the one desperate for more contact. He's the one who always wants to see me, not the inverse. I don't hate my dad, but I don't really like him either. Him having no more contact with me would devastate him, while it would probably slightly improve my life. I told him as long as I'm a grown-ass, career-having, tax-paying adult, what I consume is my business alone. If that was the hill he was willing to die on, I wouldn't hold him back. I didn't end up moving out that day, although it didn't take much longer, and my dad decided that the easiest course of action was to ignore the situation to death since he realized he couldn't possibly win. I'm pretty sure if you ask him now if I ever smoked weed, he'd deny it, because denying reality is easier than facing it for him. Next story. When I was about 10, my parents sent me to summer camp for a month. I'd been before and it had been fun, but this year was awful. The counselor was abusive and I was writing home every day complaining about how terrible she was. Eventually, it created such a stink that my parents were calling demanding to know what was going on, and I was demanding to talk to them on the phone. They set up a time for me to come to their administrative office to make a phone call. Well, I get there and some random-ass secretary tells me I can't make the call until I sign some piece of paper, basically saying that all the problems in the cabin are my fault somehow. I just looked at her and said, I'm not signing that, give me the phone. And then, once I called my parents, the first thing I said was, you won't believe what these people tried to make me sign. Yeah, the camp was in deep crap for trying to make a minor sign some bullcrap CYA form, in addition to the abusive counselor. To this day, I'm surprised and proud of myself for not taking any of their crap and calling their bluff as a 10-year-old. Next story. I work in a school doing finance, and a few years back, we received a water bill for $14,000. With it was a letter that said their engineer had taken the reading, so it was an actual, not estimated charge. I did a bit of homework before calling them to dispute it. The lady on the phone insisted that it was a valid charge and had to be paid. I forget my exact words, but I said something like, I've checked our records and we have no record of you visiting, so either you're not telling the truth or you allowed your engineer to wander around a site full of children unaccompanied, in which case I want to speak with your manager and call the police. We did not pay $14,000. Next story. A VP at some tech company tried to pull the "Do you know who I am?" card when a teenage Starbucks barista told them they were out of oat milk, and she just stared at him and said, yeah, you're the guy who's about to get regular milk or leave. Yeah, I guess it really doesn't matter who you are. If they're out of stock, they're out of stock. I mean, you're not going to get that milk. Go teenage barista. Next story. This was more of an I have no power here, but I will F this company's selective rules. Worked at a big department store at a high-end makeup brand counter. They were very strict with the return rules. Unless the customer was an a-hole, then they would give the customer whatever they want. I felt like it rewarded bad behavior and made me look stupid for saying no. So I started telling my customers who asked for things outside the rules that I couldn't process their request, but if I call over a manager, they can. If a company has rules that only apply to nice people, then I say F that company. Next story. 2 for the price of 1. When I was much younger, I managed a bottle shop, liquor store / off license for our US and UK readers. That was part of a much larger retail chain. I was unloading a delivery in the back when I heard a huge commotion at the register, so I ambled out to see what was happening. Upon getting to the front of the store, I see one of my team members copping an absolute spray from some old bloke, who's going on about how immigrants are taking Australian jobs and how he's going to have them sacked, etc. The guy working the register was Nepalese. Once the codger had gotten it all out, my cashier told him to please leave the store, as we wouldn't be serving him after the torrent of abuse. The old bloke turns to look at me and says, "Are you going to let him do that?" I replied, "No," and the customer's face lit up. Unfortunately for him, I continued, "I think that he didn't go far enough, so we're banning you from the store." After a second torrent of abuse, he threatened to call corporate, etc., and eventually left after I threatened to call the cops. The next morning, I get a furious call from the district manager, insisting that I unban this idiot. I told her that company policy is that any racial vilification results in a ban from the store, and if she wants to take it up with her boss, she's welcome to, but I'm looking forward to seeing how she justifies the customer's behavior, which was all caught on tape. She hung up on me and it was never mentioned again. Next story. Not from me, but stories I've heard from my parents. They live in an older, fairly affluent neighborhood. The neighborhood itself was built over 15 to 20 years and started when there was nothing else out there but a dirt road and a bunch of trees. But for the last several decades, it's been notorious for having an extremely pushy and litigious HOA with many self-appointed minions who look for any violation they can. There are laws written into the state's constitution specifically because of the shenanigans their HOA has pulled over the years. Funny thing is that my parents' lot, being one of the first lots built out there and for whatever other reasons, is one of a few in the neighborhood that technically aren't part of the neighborhood and is not subject to any of the HOA's deed restrictions. None of the little HOA minions want to accept that. My parents have received letters, phone calls, notes on their front door, and my parents just get to ignore it all. Edit. I'll add that they've lived there for decades and that most of the HOA headaches happened early on after they first moved in. A lot of it stemmed from doing major renovations on the house and the HOA wanting to have a say in it. There was one self-appointed HOA wannabe who tried to make a big sting about what they were doing. He eventually moved away, and even with it all, my parents took the high road the entire time and never retaliated or made a fuss. They just ignored it. Water off their backs. Next story. I went back to school in my 40s, mainly to get certified for work I was already doing. In the labs, I wear my old shop coat. The labs are all using CNC mills, manual lathes, etc. Messy stuff. A manager from the college's finance department sees me working away on my project and proceeds to berate me for daring to show up for work in such a ratty uniform. She's not the first one to confuse me for a professor, so I keep on trying to tell her I don't work at the college. Somehow this makes her angrier, so she threatens to have me fired for not wearing my staff ID on a lanyard. She's one of those people who never screams. She just gets very precise with her diction. About this time, the head of the department walks in and hears the tail end of her rant. So she digs something out of his briefcase, hands it to me, and says, "Here, I marked your exam. You got a 93%. Would you mind tutoring someone for me?" That's when it sinks in that I'm a student, not a teacher. Next story. After a really bad injury, I was in a nursing home for rehab. I did PT and OT 5 days a week. If I needed speech therapy, I could do that too. One day, they decide that if you have Medicaid as your insurance, your therapies will be reduced to 3 times a week. But that's PT, OT, and ST combined. The other private insurances, BCBS, Medica, etc., would have no change. So, say someone had 5 days a week for PT, OT, and ST. That's 15 sessions a week between them. The change would have made it for 3 sessions a week between them. If they wanted to make this change, they'd have to do it for all insurances and not just Medicaid because it's discriminatory. My physical therapist came and told me right away that day because she knew I wouldn't stand for it. I went to the director and told her what she's doing is illegal, and she admitted that the company that oversees that nursing home did it for financial reasons. I told her I was going to be calling the ombudsman for nursing homes and Medicaid to report them. She didn't even know what an ombudsman was, which she should know, working as an admin at a nursing home. For those that don't know, it's basically someone who advocates for you if you're in a nursing home or hospital. I followed through with that, and by the end of the day, they reversed the decision, and everyone could have the therapies they need and deserve. If I heard this and didn't have Medicaid, I'd still call and advocate for others because this crap is just sickening. Next story. I joined a personal training department as a trainer right as the gym had acquired it from a company they were contracting out to. So when I started, they were pretty free with any rules for what we had to do or could do. After a couple months, I was one of the more booked up and requested trainers. I created my own workout sheets and gave clients homework for when they didn't have sessions with me, and overall had a pretty well-developed system people loved. Then they started making up random rules like that we needed to tuck our shirts in. Every single client was like, "That just looks silly. Why would you do that?" One day, the manager called me into his office to give me the breakdown on further things he wanted me to do and scold me for not tucking my shirt in. I let him talk, opened my binder and said, "All right, I'll do that for the next 2 weeks," and handed him my 2-week notice. I had already been poaching more than half of my clients to cancel their memberships and leave with me to do my own training. There were no rules that said that I couldn't. He tried to give me a, "But how are you going to pay bills if you quit?" grilling, and I just laughed and said, "I don't actually even need this job. I just have fun doing it." Next story. Just last week, I had an a-hole chew me out and demand he speak with a supervisor or manager or someone. I politely said, "You're speaking to Blue Cheetos, the employee who likes to make the company look good and keep customers happy. If you want to escalate to the Blue Cheetos who poured blood, sweat, and tears into building his own company so he didn't have to deal with bullcrap, we can go that route. Your choice." Next story. I worked at Best Buy a million years ago. One night, we had a little get-together at a house. Somehow, the a-hole supervisor got invited, or found out about it. He was a guy in his mid-30s, lived with his parents, and retail was as far as he'd ever go in life. He was a bully at work, rude, condescending, and constantly hit on teenage girls and customers. Anyway, he got into it with one of the guys we worked with, arguing about something stupid, and the supervisor said something along the lines of, "If you keep this up, you'll pay for it tomorrow." The other kid, who was maybe 17 or 18 by the way, stood up and slapped the absolute piss out of the supervisor. Just one massive, loud slap that his grandmother probably felt. The kid yelled, "Who the F do you think you're talking to? This ain't a store, you B." It was amazing. He was only there another 2 months, but from what I saw, he kept to himself and, other than required shift meetings, never said a word to anyone. Next story. I once had a patient threaten to sue me because I placed orders for a nurse to do a nasal swab for COVID plus flu. They claimed I assaulted them and that they'd call their lawyer if I didn't do what they wanted. A lot of pain and anxiety meds. I took their phone from the bedside table and gave it to them and said, "Call them right now. I'd love to talk to them." They were silent for what felt like 10 straight seconds before they grumbled about how they didn't feel like doing it right now. Next story. My own, and I'm still proud of young me. I had to pick up my little brother from a school dance, and I had walked to the school with the plan of just walking him back safely because we lived right around the corner. Now, keep in mind, I'm small, 5 foot nothing, and newly 18 at the time, but my brother was decently taller than me, so I get that would look weird. I walk into the gym to find him. I get him ready to go, and as we're walking out, his teacher, who I knew and hated, even had myself, when I was in his grade, with a sourpuss face on, grabs my arm a little too hard to stop us from leaving, saying we needed a parent to go home with to leave the dance. She didn't recognize me, I guess? Being freshly 18, and with that whole I'm an adult and can do whatever I want now mentality, I yanked my arm away and in my best adult voice, read as fully formal and dignified to my young autistic brain that was grown-up speak, I go, "Miss D, I'm here to pick up my brother with my parents' full permission. I'm blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. I had you several years ago. You cannot stop me from bringing him home, and don't touch me again. We'll be leaving now." And the dawn of realization in her eyes, knowing who I was and that she couldn't keep me there, along with her mouth going all lemony, was satisfying as hell. She just huffed and walked away like I was in the wrong, but she was, and she effing knew it. It was the first real grown-up interaction I had with an adultier adult outside my family, and I felt like a badass. Next story. My 4th day ever working as a lifeguard at 16. An infant fell out of a chair that's way too big for them and cracked her head open. I reacted to the mother screaming, since they were sitting behind me and I couldn't see them, got everyone out of the pool and got my manager to call 911. Ambulance was there within 10 minutes. Infant lived. The mother then threatened to sue me for neglecting the responsibilities of my job, saying that I should have warned her against putting her child in a large lounge chair. I responded, "So you want to sue me because a 16-year-old kid should be telling a 30-year-old mother how to take care of her kid?" She promptly stopped talking. Next story. Worked in hotels for over a decade, nearly all of it front-facing. So I've seen the worst of it when it comes to making front staff into the bad guys who say no, while the managers get to come out from behind the desk and give them everything they wanted anyway. Never managed the clinical detachment some were able to develop. I secretly hated every smug a-hole who walked away with free stuff and then treated me like crap for the rest of their stay. Pandemic hits. Hotels can't effing wait to get rid of every last one of us. Ended up begging a job at the hospital off a friend. And my darlings, I've never felt so utterly delighted as I did when those self-same a-holes tried to have procedures done without the medically required labs beforehand. Understand, these labs were a bit inconvenient. You had to get blood drawn and wait for results for 30 to 45. But this type of procedure was uncommon, infrequent, and utterly necessary because not getting the dosing correct would literally kill you. And here were these older folks who thought a young-looking woman could be yelled at until she folded, who sneered at my commonplace job, at the nurses, at probably everyone they'd ever met. They huffed and puffed, they whined and growled, they snarled and shouted insults, they swore to get me fired for incompetence, or rudeness, or lack of respect. But you know what happened? Either they got the test done or they left. No one was allowed to skip it. I reveled in the power of being able to tell someone no, and know that no one would or could take it back or change it. The supervisors would back me, the nurses would back me, the director would back me, all the way up, because skipping those tests would cost the nurse their license, probably shut down the department, and potentially threaten the entire hospital. Best damn no I ever got to say. Next story. I do construction for a state agency. Our projects are not under the jurisdiction of whatever municipality we're in. Rather, our agency is the authority having jurisdiction. That means we have our own building code program, issue building permits, etc. Certain towns and cities I work in have reputations as having major PITA code enforcement officials. Occasionally, they breeze into my jobs trying to swing their chickens around, and the feeling I get when I shut that crap down and send them packing is quite nice. Next story. My wife and I bought the house I grew up in from my parents. Part of the deal included providing a suite for them to live with us. My dad never got over the fact that this was no longer his house, and our relationship soured a bit. One day, he was demanding that I do something, and I had zero intention of doing it. Not out of spite, but because it's not something I wanted done. I refused. He got into dad mode, fully raised his voice, and demanded it in a way that would have sent me flying into submission when I was younger. I calmly walked close to him and said, "Do you still think I'm effing scared of you?" He had an obvious moment of realization and walked away. Our relationship was never the same from that moment on. Please understand, this was not a proud moment for me. This is a realization that my childhood hero was really an abusive a-hole with a god complex. Our relationship changed so greatly that I cannot tell you the date or even the year he passed away sometime after this incident. It took a lot of therapy to come to terms with. Next story. Effed up and long, but it left my wife and daughter in awe, so my daughter comes to me crying that her friend's dad hit her and she was running away. So I went and picked her up. She runs out to the car in her socks, crying with the start of a shiner. My instinct was to go even things out, but she insisted she just wanted to get away and let him cool down. She was a foster kid, so terrified of going back in the system or being separated from her two sisters, so no police. I get her to my house, calmed down, cleaned up, and my wife, with no experience with this kind of crap, says all she can think is how panicked she'd be if one of our girls ran away, so she calls the mom to tell her where the kid is and that she's safe. 5 minutes later, Mom is pounding on my door. I give my wife my most aggrieved look and go deal with her. Her, "I want my daughter right now." Me, "That's not going to happen." "I'll call the police." Excellent idea. I'll explain why she's here, and you can explain why your 200-pound husband felt the need to hit an 80-pound girl. I'd have already called them, but she begged me not to. "I'm going to go get my husband." "Do that. It'll be a much fairer fight. Maybe they need to calm down. She can stay here for a few days." "Sounds good. Have a nice night." Come to find out, my wife and daughter and the friend were eavesdropping and started cheering as soon as she drove off. I thought I was totally calm, but my wife said it was the most menacing thing she'd ever heard. Next story. When I was a newbie med tech, an intern dropped off a pregnancy test in my lab before the dipsticks were available. So I set it with the rest of the pregnancy test samples, waiting for the big batch from the clinic to be efficient. Less than an hour later, intern comes back for the results, and I told him it wasn't done and it would be run with the rest of the routine tests. He got all puffed up and yelled at me, "I marked it stat! I want it done stat! It's on my wife!" I was about to remind him that our policy on stat testing when the chief of pathology, who had been sitting in the corner using a special microscope as he occasionally did, unfolded all 6'6" of his Ichabod Crane physique and said, "Dr. McShouty, stat pregnancy test for a mistress, perhaps, for a wife, never. We will call you when the results are available." Dr. McShouty slithered out of my lab. Next story. Delivering furniture when the customer is unhappy about us not being willing or able to go over their third-floor balcony. He name drops the VP of sales to my driver, saying that he knows him very well and talks to him all the time. My driver just folded up the paperwork and said, "Oh yeah? Me too." We just got back in the truck and drove away. Next story. Years ago, our HOA president was replaced by a woman named Karen who made life the absolute hell for years. She was a power-hungry, angry woman who slowly filled the board with her friends. It got to a point where she would issue fines for visible gas meters and for just about anything else she wanted. People hated it, but somehow she was always voted in. Then she picked on a lawyer. He had his 38-foot boat parked in the street overnight. It was there from evening to morning. When he came out to move it, there was a note and a fine, and that set him off. He did whatever lawyers do in cases like this, and discovered that Mrs. Pugh was cooking the books and cooking the votes. With the help of her fellow board members, there's a tax issue with the HOA of some kind that had led to a lien. Through some process, he paid that tax, and as a result, was able to essentially take control of the HOA, which he did very publicly during a meeting with the help of a constable. He walked in, announced that the HOA was changing to a MUD with defined conditions, or something like that, and that the MUD would pay for the pool and clubhouse maintenance, and that was that. The constable dismissed everyone. Karen had the balls to continue to try and enforce the old HOA rules, but then, while inspecting houses, she got trapped by angry residents who threatened her bodily, and it all finally stopped. Glorious. So two awful stereotypes collide here. A woman named Karen and the president of an HOA. I feel like you're just doomed to not be a good person if you meet those criteria. Next story. As a non-male person working as a manager in a comic and game store, I did indeed have a misogynistic a-hole come in who completely disregarded my knowledge because of my perceived gender. I want the lead-up arc to the death of blank. Which issue do I start with? Oh, easy. Issue X. I believe we have all the back issues in that arc. If you want, I can— No, you're wrong. That's not it. He proceeds to try and school me on this, being very rude in the process and clearly condescending. And after I continue to calmly reiterate the actual issues to no avail, my male boss finally catches this from afar, comes over and asks, "Everything all right?" Guy explains what he's looking for. My boss says, "Okay, got it. Let me get our comic manager," and leaves out the back of the store. Coming back in a few seconds later, strolling up to the counter beside me and gesturing to me with a, "Here they are, ask away." I proceeded to give the same answer I'd been giving, and the guy, absolutely gobsmacked and sheepishly silent, bought the issues he was looking for and slipped out the door with his metaphorical tail between his legs. Definitely learned a lesson that day that attitude had no power here. Next story. Completely organic party at an all-student apartment complex. Started off with a couple of neighbors having a few people over. Evolved quickly to a DJ setting up on the second-floor balcony and at least 1,000 people packed into a courtyard and the surrounding parking lot. It was crazy. People were parking a mile away at a shopping center and walking in. A single cop pulled into the middle of the crowd, turned his blue lights on and hit the siren. Whoop, whoop. Almost in unison, 1,000 people yelled, "Whoop, whoop, it's the sound of the police," followed by laughter. Cop turned his lights off and eased back out of the parking lot. More police showed up. They set up a roadblock at the exit to the complex and just checked to make sure nobody drunk was trying to drive home. Next story. I used to work as an exotic dancer, and it was always funny to me how often men assumed that they could come into our work, speak down to us, and get away with it. I could tell these misogynistic dudes felt like because we were in a customer service type job and had an outwardly vulnerable appearance, we were just an object they could spew their incel ego trip bullcrap at. But what they didn't realize is we have all the power at the club. I could immediately talk crap back. I'm talking completely roast his ass, and then walk over to a bouncer, tell him that man is harassing me, and get his ass dragged out. The look on their faces when they realized they didn't have any power and immediately effed up was the most satisfying crap ever. Next story. My mother is a jerk. Dad got custody after the divorce, at my insistence, but Dad and his mother didn't want to alienate me from my own mother, so they encouraged me to maintain a relationship with her. After I was out in the working world living in my own apartment, this jerk of a mother made a habit of scheduling her vacations and then telling me, not asking, when she would be flying in and staying at my place. This was one of the lesser levels of her obnoxiousness. She also made a habit of dominating social situations. Once, when she announced a visit, I already had a prior commitment, mentioned it in advance, and invited her along to be courteous, with a caution about what the evening would be and a suggestion she might not enjoy it. This bulldozer of a relative insisted on coming anyway. Mother took French in school. She doesn't remember much of it. My second language is German. Started learning it after Dad got custody. There hadn't ever been a reason to speak it in front of her, and she was never curious about my progress. Until we walked in the door of that event, she acted as if my warning had been nonsense. It actually was in German. The dinner conversations were in German. The speakers gave their talks in German. Sometimes people would say a few words in English to her to be polite before turning to resume discussions with others and with me in German. Did my best to include Mom, summarizing translations to keep her up to speed and even explaining the puns. She smiled. She sat up straight. Her manners were flawless. She was completely pwned. She didn't try to foist herself for another visit until after I moved to a different state. Next story. I got hit by a minivan going 40 to 50 kilometers an hour when crossing the street and was in the ER. A nurse told me I had torn ligaments in my knee and to try and walk, so I got up and immediately collapsed from pain. She stared at me, told me to stop being dramatic, and I was only acting like that because she told me something was wrong. When I was being wheeled out by her, I told her I was going to puke, and she said to stop being dramatic, it's just the adrenaline wearing off. She moved to the side of the wheelchair where I turned and puked, which was all over her. I felt bad, but it was so satisfying. Next story. I'm a nurse at a psych hospital, and this lady was going nuts, yelling and screaming at everyone, belittling us and the staff, refusing meds, all of it. When she came up to me during med pass, she asked what she was getting, and I told her. She got furious and said, "You know what? I don't know why I even bother. I don't need to be here or any of these meds. I know what you're giving me, and I don't need any of it. I'm a doctor." To which I responded, "Yeah, not at this hospital." Then she stormed off. Didn't actually care to check if she was an actual doctor or not, but was proud of my response. Next story. Some random lady from down the street complained about me wasting water while I was out in my front yard watering plants. So I sprayed her with the hose. Her husband came up the street and had something to say to me about it. I don't even remember what it was. I just remember he was mad. I sprayed him with the hose too. It didn't escalate past that. He just ended up going home all wet. Yeah, if only that worked 100% of the time. When someone's like getting on your nerves, just blast them with the hose and then they stop, just like that. I guess technically that means that water was not wasted here. Next story. My brother is the fixer for a niche machine that most all serious manufacturing sites have. This machinery is crucial to their operations. My brother would fly to your location same day or next day as time allows. If my brother is coming in, it's because others have tried to fail to fix said machine. He gets called to a very large factory that's at a standstill due to one of these machines being down. He's doing his thing on the machine when the manager calls my brother over to a team meeting they're having on the shop floor. The manager starts berating my brother about stupid stuff and how that machine should be fixed by now, blah blah. My brother walked back to the machine and started packing up his stuff. The manager started freaking out, asking him what he's doing. My brother calmly told him, "You don't get to yell at me. I'm leaving." My brother then proceeds to walk out with the manager following him, telling him he can't leave. My brother called his boss expecting to get into trouble, but he said, "F them, they need us. We don't need them." Word got up to the higher-ups about why the line was stopped, and that manager was demoted with a serious ass-chewing. After much ass-kissing and promises to not have that happen again, my brother went and fixed their machine the next day. The staff in the factory were telling my brother how awesome that was that he walked out. They said the a-hole manager was freaking out after he left. Priceless. Next story. I was 18, maybe 19, living in a trailer I'd bought from my mom's parents. I was delivering pizza for Domino's, and me and the assistant manager had the weekend off, so after our lunch shift, we hit the river with her brother and her roommate and then partied at their place where I crashed. Saturday was a repeat of Friday, and Sunday was also. I came dragging home about 9 a.m. Monday morning to get ready for my 10 a.m. class, and my dad comes knocking. He goes on how I can't spend all weekend partying like that and I need to be more responsible and whatnot. So I just handed him my electric bill, which was in the sorter I put bills in by the door, and told him, "I need you to go pay this for me," and handed it to him. He looks at it. "I ain't paying your bill." "No, you don't, and that means you don't tell me what to do. Your advice is welcome, but not your orders," or something like that. This was over 30 years ago. Next story. People don't seem to realize how much power flight attendants have. Name-calling is a level 1 threat. We will turn around or divert and deplane you, and security will be waiting for you. Please don't make us do that, though. We just want to get to our layovers to rest. When we give you any instruction, it's not because we're trying to be a jerk, it's because we have to, per the FAA. Next story. Ironically, it came from someone with a lot of power. I had to go to court over a workplace injury settlement. The place I worked for didn't provide any kind of safety equipment for moving extremely heavy boxes full of product, and I ended up injuring myself trying to move this heavy product to a shelf. The judge who took on the case was notorious for her hatred of big corporations and their treatment of employees, which was awesome for me. The original payout wasn't even going to cover further medical costs, and they didn't give me time to get a lawyer. The hearing was in the same week I had agreed to settle before a judge. The judge had no idea that I had not been given proper notice until the day of the hearing and knew there wasn't a lawyer in the state that would have taken my case without time to review, which was the issue I ran into. The company's attorney tried to bully his way through the hearing, justifying the pathetic payout with bullcrap excuses, and then attempted to blame me for intentionally trying to injure myself to get a payout. The judge, after the umpteenth time she or I was interrupted after trying to ask me questions, just tilted her head towards the other lawyer with the sweetest smile and called this guy out in the most brutal way without ever changing her very gentle tone. She told him that his excuses were just excuses, and that she found it hard to believe that I would willingly settle for an amount that wouldn't even pay for my next round of pain relief treatments, knowing that I was stuck with this injury for life. It was a herniated disc in my neck, torn trap muscle, a ripped tendon around my shoulder. She then went on to explaining that forcing a representative for the company into the room with me and the doctor not only compromised the care I should have been receiving, but that it likely corrupted diagnostics as I was only going to doctors approved and paid for by the company. It was also highly illegal. Then she said this: "I suggest you stop talking before I come up with a number that will force your company to rethink how they treat their employees on a national scale." Lawyer went from overly confident and pushy to fumbling over his words in about 0.5 seconds. She then looked at me, told me to get a lawyer, and they would reschedule the hearing for a more appropriate date that actually allowed me to get representation and earn proper compensation. We had the same judge for the next hearing, and while the settlement wasn't something that would hurt the company on a national scale, it definitely ended up being a number that made them finally put some proper moving equipment into their stores. Next story. My canine search team was tasked with clearing an area that was a suspected body dump site in a small-scale rural drug turf war. We got to the spot in the desert, and there's an RV parked right smack in the middle of our search area. We politely explain what's going on and ask the guy to move his camper a little ways down the road. He refuses and says he knows his rights and we can't make him move. I agree with him. We can't force him to leave. He looks smug. Then I explain that his RV is now part of a suspected crime scene, and since we won't do that kind of search, we can ask the deputy to have it impounded and searched by the crime scene techs, who will get to it when they get to it. Meanwhile, my team is circling the camper with crime scene tape and discussing things like subpoenas and civil forfeiture. He asked if it was okay to just move a little ways down the road, and we pointed him to a really pretty spot. Next story. As a young PFC in the Marine Corps, I was walking down a street one day when I heard a commotion on the other side of the street. There was an Ensign, who looked even younger than me, trying to chew out a chief petty officer. I swear they looked like Odie and Garfield. The chief finally had enough and told the Ensign, "Why don't you just shut up?" That poor Ensign learned right there who runs the military, and it wasn't him. LOL. And then the chief looked across the street and asked me just what I was looking at. LOL. Next story. This summer, I was 15 and visiting my dad and wife number 3. He lived in Hawaii and mom was in California, so I only went during the summer. He slapped me in the face during an argument, then dragged me out to his van and locked the door/set the alarm so he'd know if I got out. The next summer, when I was supposed to go see him, I refused. He called my mom, who he used to smack around while cheating on her with younger women, and told her to, quote, "get me under control." She replied without missing a beat, "I don't control women, Ken. That's you, remember?" Haven't seen him since. Love my mom for that. I still brag about it 20 years later. Next story. I had to call a ceasefire on a shooting range in the Army once. The staff sergeant, E6, heretofore known as the offender firing on the range in front of me, had a jam of some type. In the offender's attempts to fix it, they flipped the gun so it was pointing away from the range and towards the spectators. Me. The reason for my call of ceasefire. Anyway, the offender ignored me and kept effing with their gun. I shouted at them to put down their effing gun and repeated ceasefire. After they finally listened, they started yelling at me for cursing at them and disrespecting an NCO and listed the ways I would be punished. By this time, the range officer had made it to us and caught a part of the tirade. He quieted the offender down and asked me why I called ceasefire. After I explained, he pulled the offender aside, put them at attention, and had what looked like a very stern conversation. As they came back, I heard him saying that he would be following up with me later. He then told me I did the right thing and to disregard everything the offender had said, finally finishing up with an announcement to the range participants at large that safety was everyone's top priority and that anyone could and should stop the range if they see something unsafe, no matter the rank. Next story. I'm an academic. I'd been working with a local company to give them some advice on data analysis they were doing. I was doing this pro bono because my university has a policy of supporting local organizations when we can, and also because my contact there was someone I knew from my hometown. It was only about 15 to 30 minutes of my time a week. The company got taken over by a bully and complete moron, and my friend ended up leaving because of the toxic culture. A month or so later, I got an email from the new boss. He told me that I would be expected to conduct a full analysis in lieu of their former employee, in excess of 20 hours a week worth of work, and that he was expecting this to be done immediately, or he would be firing me from the company. I replied, pointing out some key points to him, namely that 1, I didn't work for the company, 2, I had been providing advice on an informal basis and was under no obligation to continue to do so, and 3, that if he wanted my assistance, he could pay my university the standard consultancy rate. He railed against this initially and threatened legal action, at which point I introduced him to our law department. Because yeah, not only do we have our own lawyers, we're also the place that train lawyers. He went silent after that. Next story. Oh, it was me. I did it. Got an unconditional offer from my university after passing a scholarship exam. Was excitedly discussing it with my friend in chemistry class when we should have been paying attention. Teacher shouts, "Reverend Malarick, what makes you think you don't need to pass these exams?" My friends start saying, "Please, can I? I say, "No, I got this," and stand up. This morning, I got an unconditional offer and a scholarship from my university. I don't need to pass these exams. Felt good. Next story. I worked as a waiter at a British restaurant in Seattle in the 1980s. I was a right-off-the-boat Englishman at the time. The owner, a real character called Nigel, also British, charged 25 cents per glass of water on the grounds that he knocked 25 cents off glasses of wine. His joint, his rules. I answered the telephone once, and this woman, a food critic for the Seattle newspaper, let off a torrent of abuse at me over the 25-cent water charge she had paid the night before, ending with, "I'll never set foot in your restaurant again." Without thinking, I answered, "Well, madam, we very much look forward to never seeing you again." She included that retort in her negative review of the restaurant. The day the review was published, I came to work with some trepidation. What if Nigel fires me? "Are you the one who answered the food's critic's call?" he asked me. Yes. Sorry, Nigel." "Well, you ought to have told her that she's a effing idiot." We all had a laugh, and sales never went down. Next story. I worked at a Dairy Queen. The guy I worked for was kind of cheap, so there were only 3 of us who worked the store that summer. Myself, him, he's the owner, and a woman he was training to run the DQ she was building a couple states away. She used to work for him, but was moving to be by her family. The woman would work 3 weeks straight, then took a week off to be with her family. He also owned other DQs in the area, and occasionally had to go deal with them, so I was often left to run the store by myself, with the phone number to his wife who lived 2 minutes away, in case I got slammed and needed help. Because I was entrusted with his store often enough, I was allowed to take on his attitude towards problem customers. Get the F out. I was expected to give amazing customer service, but not expected to tolerate abuse from customers. It's relevant to know that I was 18 at the time, so while I had a lot of responsibilities at that store, most customers assumed I was just a ground-level employee. Boss was out, but expected back soon when I had a small line of people one day. But nothing out of the ordinary. Guy comes up and orders a dip cone. No problem, it takes less than a minute. It was like $2.50. Guy was somewhat irregular and one of those guys who thinks he's God's gift to women. He gives me $20. I give him his change and start to turn to the person behind him. "You did so good, I'm going to give you a tip this time, sweetheart," he said, and he proceeded to take the $10 from his change and tuck it down my shirt. I was stunned for a second, then retrieved the bill and threw it back at him, and told him, "Get your Don Johnson wannabe ass out of here, and don't come back." He immediately got mad, calling me little girl and threatening my job. I hadn't realized my boss had come inside the door, but this guy saw him and smugly said, "There's a man in charge," before telling boss what happened, then smugly looking at me as he expected my consequence to come. Boss looks at us, then says, "You're right, she did do something wrong." He picks up the $10 and hands it back to me and says, "You deserve that for putting up with this guy. Now get out and don't bother going to the nearest DQ." I own that one too. Next story. Our job is computer certification for the government. A producer tries to push his half-baked sloppy system that doesn't even have the minimum legal requirements. On his 3rd try, we receive a letter from a high-level politician, leader of half the country, saying that the colleague who rejected the guy 3 times was incompetent and should be fired. My boss just had one answer wrapped in bureaucrat babble. "We are federal. It means get the F out." The coworker has been promoted. My boss, who created the certification process, took the guy and told him step by step what he must drop and what he must create until it was just good enough to be certified. He never sold one of his bugged systems. Next story. Years ago, when I was in the Army, I was drunkenly catching a taxi from the city back to my barracks. It was normally a $50 fare back then because my barracks was a long way from the city. But it was also a fairly quick trip because most of that distance was via motorway. Anyway, I must have dozed off because I awoke in some suburbs that were definitely not a motorway and definitely not on my trip home. It took me a few minutes to figure out where I really was, which was still a long way from my barracks, and the meter was already at $50. I asked the driver why we were in this suburb, and he told me, "Don't worry, this way is much quicker." I kept my mouth shut and let him continue the journey. When we got to the front gate of the barracks, the fare was $90. I handed him a $50 note and told him to be grateful I even paid him at all. He started yelling at me, but I got out the taxi and walked through the gate. I flashed my ID on the way through and told the guard on duty, "Do not let that man through, under any circumstances." I heard later on that the taxi driver had refused to move his car from the entrance, so the guy on duty called the local police, who turned up and told him to leave or he would be arrested.